Number 1, why punish thought crime if free will is about action? It's Jesus himself who famously elevates internal thoughts to the level of physical, actionable sin. Anyone who looks at a woman with lust has committed adultery. Any man that looks on his brother in anger has committed murder. This introduces quite the complication. If morality, the immorality that leads to sin, is based off actions that are freely chosen, which we're going to get to that initial problem, how possibly could we be responsible for our thoughts? Does this God, do the people who wrote this not know that our thoughts are not really well within our control? For those even that believe in agency at all, you might say, okay, a thought popped into my head and now I'm choosing what I do with it. But if you've ever done any kind of mindfulness meditation practice, if you've ever just sat and tried to observe what happens in your brain, you very quickly find out the onslaught of uncontrollable thoughts that pass through our mind at any given second. And I even like some of the scriptural concepts around this. Capture every thought. That's after you've noticed it, though. It's come in and now you have the choice for what you're going to do. Will you act on it? But the thought itself, if it's true that thoughts equal sin and sin separates you from God, then you have no free will in the fact that you are separated from God or not. Which, by the way, is already obvious with the concept of original sin. But that's one of the more basic arguments within free will. I wanted to show you some nuanced versions here. The second question I have for you is one that when you take it out of the doctrinal aspect, it's pretty easy to answer, even for believers. But as soon as it comes to their God, it's like they forget how logic works. And it's a simple question. Can you freely choose under duress? We all know the answer is no. If someone has a gun to your head and says, give me your husband's credit card, and they do it, no husband in their right mind is going to get mad at them and say, why did you do that? You have free will. Why didn't you exercise it? It's not really free will, a true free choice, if the most massive consequence that is on the other side of it. Anyone who would argue otherwise is simply trying to defend the obvious implication that has for Christianity with a looming threat of hell or annihilation or whatever you believe about the afterlife. There's kind of a sub-point on this one to not make it its own next, but as an example, if a kidnapper says, hey, love me or suffer forever, it's not just the point that I made that that's not really a free choice. It's can it even be legitimate? So when that person says, yes, I love you, because that's the only actual choice, can they actually make themselves love? And so the sub-point here is that I think that goes into how we love God or how we believe in God. Is it really belief when threatened? Is it really love when coerced? The next question I have for you is, will there be a tree of temptation in heaven? And this is actually a much bigger question, or bigger point, I should say, on my biggest issue with heaven, which is that there cannot actually be free will in heaven if there is a guarantee of no death, tears, sorrow, or sin. What did we hear about the reason God had to put the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden? What's the Christian apologetic for that when the skeptic rightly says, how unfair for God to put this thing in front of them, these moral toddlers that didn't even know the difference between right and wrong yet? The Christian answer is always, well, God had to give them free will. Otherwise, perfection didn't matter. Because Eden was perfect, it was bliss, it was without sin. Just the potential had to be there for sin, so that God didn't have robots or slaves or all the other dumb things Christians say. So then everyone goes to heaven, and what? No more tree required? You don't have to have the potential to sin in heaven? The tree is more of an example. It's not that there would have to be a tree for this. There could be many different ways. But I think it's very clear that if none have ever, no human, by the way, of course we have the fall of the angels, which is its own free will issue, but it's related. But if in the history of time no one individual has ever in heaven rebelled, it's not because no one chose to, it's because no one can. And if you're the person right now saying, no, just when you're in the presence of God like that, you wouldn't want to, insert Lucifer, insert Adam and Eve, all of which had been in the presence of God in a paradise and still chose to sin. So I think the inconsistencies between Eden and heaven show a ton of issues and should be its own episode, but not least of which is the issues with free will in heaven. The next question is a bit more popular than some of the others we've done. Does the concept of omniscience eradicate the concept of free will? On one hand, you have the typical Christian answer that is, just because someone knows something is going to happen doesn't mean they're taking away someone's free will. And a popular analogy might be, if I offer my kid an Oreo or a scoop of blue cheese, I know they're going to choose the Oreo. That doesn't mean they didn't actually have the free choice between the two, it just means I knew the outcome. But that's a false analogy, because unless I created fully my child and instilled in them every little desire and thought and how their brain works, and also made the Oreos and the world that exists, and did it all with perfect foreknowledge of what would happen before I did it, and I'm all powerful. That's the main point here. It's the combination of foreknowledge with omnipotence. That is very different than the parent who just knows the typical preference of the child. That is complete and utter control over the situation. That is actually starting the situation, which I think absolutely does equal responsibility, which absolutely does take away the concept of free will. We didn't choose to be here. God chose for us to be here, knowing what we would do and doing nothing to change the outcome of that is the same thing as making it to happen. But curious to hear your thoughts. My next question, why are characters like Judas and Satan and the devil blamed if they're fulfilling prophecy? Maybe the bigger question at the end of that is, doesn't prophecy alone, kind of like omniscience, because it comes from that, eradicate the concept of free will? Judas is condemned for doing something he otherwise could have never done. He was born to literally be the one that betrays Jesus. Jesus even says it would be better had you not been born, which is the most insane comment maybe in the Bible, because if you actually follow through with the Christian belief that Jesus is God, that he is the Father, that he was there at creation, that he's part of that Trinity that knows every hair on the head of Judas as he's in the womb, Jesus was there when he decided for Judas to enter into existence. And yet he is telling Judas it would be better that he was not born? No, it wouldn't. Quite literally, no, it wouldn't have been better. None of humanity could be saved via the atonement of Jesus without him. So why do Christians condemn him if they need him? And why did Jesus? It's truly more than a paradox. This is straight up unbelievably irreconcilable. And of course, the same goes for the devil and Satan and all the other concepts you might have of an enemy. When you have an enemy with an all-powerful God, you only have him because God wants him there. He's a chess piece in God's big game. You can't then get mad at the chess piece. It's the one orchestrating the moves. Why does God use visions and dreams and putting feelings in people's hearts to influence them? Why influence at all if free will is so important? Can you have free will when you have a God that is influencing? And sometimes that influence is a lot bigger, right? This point could have been about Paul or Saul when he runs into Jesus on the road to Damascus. Did Paul choose Jesus? Or did Jesus choose Paul? What choice did Paul then have when Jesus shows up so starkly? And if that sounds ridiculous, then you need to consider the excuses for divine hiddenness. Because the number one excuse is that, well, if God just showed himself to you beyond the shadow of a doubt, it would take away your free will, right? Christians say that on one hand, and then they point to Paul with no irony and tell the story about how Jesus showed up directly to him, spoke to him, called him, blinded him, but that doesn't steal his free will? Which is it? My next question jumps off of that one, and it's this. Are you interrupting people's free will when you pray for them? So then another part question, is it wrong to pray for other people in an intervening way? Maybe you pray for them to win a game or pass a test or get a job. Now you're not only affecting their free will, but the free will of the other candidate that was going for that job, the other team at the sports game, the diligence of the individual to have studied or not. If God's just going to help them pass the test, what are we talking about here? Do you not see all of the issues? Anytime you ever pray for any kind of intervention from the Lord, you are praying that He interrupt free will. How is that not a problem? Can children really accept or reject God? Now, I know that Christianity and many religions try to deal with this in general with ages of accountability. The problem is, again, even despite the witness of the Holy Spirit, none of the denominations agree about when that is. Some giving precise ages, anywhere from 7 to 12 for the most part, and then some saying that it's individual, which at least makes a bit more sense, but then that's also pretty problematic because it means you can't just know when someone's soul is at risk of going to hell. But children don't have fully formed brains. There's tons they don't know, and there's tons they can't understand. And even if it is shown to them, it's done so in always a position of authority. And I get that this is true when you teach kids anything. But when I've helped my kids learn the alphabet or how to do math, those things don't have inherent claims about the free will of them to be known. So does the young, unformed brain challenge free will at all? Which leads to our next question. What about the adult brain that also is not fully developed? Maybe there's some kind of mental illness there or mental handicap. We know how different an individual can be in a bipolar episode, or who has schizophrenia, or who is even just depressed or anxious, let alone people with learning disabilities and functional development issues. Can any of those people meaningfully choose Christ? Are they held to the same standard of belief or belief plus action, depending what you believe? The Bible says believe and be saved, but if your brain doesn't work like others to be able to believe, then can you be saved? And if your answer is, well, of course God would make an exception for them, where are you getting that from? There's a ton of unfairness in the Bible. There's a ton of people that get killed or damned for things that they didn't do. That's what all of this is. All the generational sin and punishment, all the collective sin and punishment, it comes unfairly. So acting like it would be within the nature of your God to give these people an out is nowhere spoken or said. In fact, if anything, we should believe that their disability is actually a consequence of either their sin or their father's sin. This is actually punishment we're witnessing here, not grace. We talked a little bit about free will in heaven, but what about free will in hell? It's kind of two parts to this one. First is, why can't people choose God after death? And the second is, when they can't and they're stuck in hell, do they get to choose to keep on sinning? Is it still free choice? If they're denied entry by any means, it's too late, the door is permanently locked from the inside or whatever, then God's actually not a choice anymore. It's funny, if you actually just really boil these questions down to their simplest form, it's that something changes after death. Do you know what it is? Do you know what the one thing that changes is? It's not the location of earth to hell, or from being alive to being dead. It's that at the moment you die, you find out the truth. You now get to know beyond the shadow of a doubt that Jesus Christ is real. And so your belief no longer matters. It's been made null by you getting to know instead of having to have faith. Well, then why doesn't that interrupt it for every single person who's a Christian who says they are because Jesus gave them the assurance? He showed up to them personally. He saved them from this or that. What about all the people who followed Jesus when he was still here, who saw his miracles and believed because they got to see firsthand? And by the way, the gospel stories are full of people that saw who Jesus really was and still denied him. So actually it works against a lot of the apologetics that it would interrupt our free will, because then you have stories of people getting to see Jesus for sure and still denying him. And doesn't that choice exist after death? Oh, I was wrong. It's you. I was wrong because you made me born in a Muslim country and I thought Islam was correct. I never had a chance to know otherwise, but okay, I died. Now I do. I was wrong. I admit it. I'll follow you. Oh, too late? Why? How is that fair? How is that free will? And then we have our last point. This is really kind of the atheist main point when it comes to what's asked of us, or when it comes to stupid things like Pascal's wager. And it's, can someone actually choose to believe something they find unconvincing? Like right now, if you're watching this video, Christian or not, and you really, and I mean really, know completely that pick your thing, Tooth Fairy, Santa, leprechauns, whatever, doesn't exist, can you make yourself believe against that? No. Now, what if I put a gun to your head? You could lie to me, but would you all of a sudden believe that you're a 2-year-old in India? Is there any way I could convince you of that? No, we're not in charge of what we are convinced of or not. We just are or are not, depending on so many factors outside of our control. So again, where's the fairness in supposed free will when it comes to salvation? So those are my 11 questions that have to do with the very messy and messed up issue of biblical free will. We're still going to be doing a much larger free will episode. It was one of my very first ones. It's just the quality was so bad. I'm really wanting to revisit it. And as I've been making notes and thoughts, some of these questions just kept cropping up, and I thought we'd do this again as kind of a preview episode. So thanks so much for being here. I'll see you Thursday with a new Thinking Thursday episode. And until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn, my Humanist heroes, Craig, James, Jarrod, Kristi, and Matthew, my Atheist advocates, Aquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, please consider joining these fine people.